All right, it's on.
Hello, welcome to cyber insurance. What, who, how? I'm your hype man, Jordan Darling from Top Dog, and I'm going to try to make this as exciting of a topic as possible. I think we all are, uh, because it's certainly an important topic and a confusing topic to many, and it's one that keeps changing and has a lot of impact to your business. So I'm happy that you guys registered for this webinar. Excited to get talking about this. And just a little housekeeping before we get going with the presentation. If you have any questions along the way, please use the Q&A and put your questions in. I'll be monitoring those questions, and we'll have plenty of time. I think this presentation will be just under 30 minutes, and we'll have a little bit of time to go through the questions and answer anything specific that you have on your mind. So let those questions fly. And we certainly have the brains here to at least answer the question or point you in the right direction. With that, we're here with Derek Gruber with Cox Insurance, and he's going to be leading the discussion. I also have Joe, the president of Top Dog PC, and myself, Jordan Darling, and we will be some color commentary for you. So again, thanks for joining. Go ahead and kick it off, Derek.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us. We we thought, actually, I want to say this is probably 6 months in the making between conversations I've had with Joe in the past, and everything kind of boiled down to like what is the state of the cyber market? I think the conversations probably stem from talking to clients who are saying, hey, do I have to have specific cybersecurity measures in place? Do I have enough cyber coverage? How do I navigate this whole space? Because it's somewhat, challenging and confusing. So I guess Joe and I met through a mutual, acquaintance and started kicking off, hey, perhaps we could do a quick webinar, talk high level about how we can help out, navigate the pitfalls, because the other part of this too, the whole cyber market is evolving constantly. Last year alone, we saw a tremendous change within like the cyber insurance marketplace, where if you were in certain industries, it was very difficult to find renewal coverage. And if you're new to it, it was hard to get coverage just to begin with. So that's what I guess was the genesis for this conversation. And here we are today just to go through that. So happy to have the opportunity to be here to talk about cyber insurance, which I always joke, there's not a lot of fun things to talk about when it comes to insurance, it seems like, but this is one thing that's a little bit different and unique. So here we are. So thanks for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead and kick off the slides here. So we try to be super cute with what cyber insurance is. We're going to go through a quick agenda here, and as Jordan kind of mentioned, we're going to spend time going through kind of a multifaceted approach. So I look at cyber risk assessment or cyber liability insurance as like, it's super important. If you don't have it, if you don't have the right measures in place, it can be super devastating to your business pretty much. So, so we're going to do a quick background on what an incident looks like. What is cyber insurance, who should have it, and then kind of how do you structure a program together with the right players involved. So that's kind of the quick agenda. So pretty much, I think we've talked about who we are, but maybe just worth mentioning quickly again, Top Dog, if, Jordan or Joe kind of want to quickly say kind of what you guys are all about and what you focus on.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys, we work with, like Cox, we work with small businesses. And we love small businesses. We're a small business ourselves, and we help out small businesses figure out their IT. We're kind of their IT department, and we try to help them do their jobs and help them provide their services to their customers, and make it a little bit easier for them.
Love it. And if you don't know us, so Cox Insurance, we are a third generation family business here in St. Paul. And we have the tagline, fiercely independent, something that we are very passionate about. And that just means there's been a lot of change in our business and our industry in general. And I think we do things a little bit differently. We have folks on certain areas, and cyber liability being one of those in particular. So we love to kind of educate and show folks what the difference is between actual risk management and then just writing a insurance policy. There's a big difference there. So thanks, guys. All right, so these, as we were kind of going through this, these are probably some of the main areas, and I would love to hear Joe or Jordan's comments as far as like, what are you guys seeing from, either your current clients or maybe some war stories you guys have heard from some of folks you talked to?
Yeah, we'll get into some war stories, but really the kind of the starting point in this conversation is asking ourselves, what is an incident? And here's some of the most common cyber incidents. It's definitely not an exhausting list, but it's breaches of personal identifying information or personal sensitive information, threats of unauthorized intrusion to your system or something that they weren't authorized to access, interference with computer systems, damage to data and systems from computer attacks, cyber related litigation. So all that to say, like, there's the easiest and simplest definition that I've heard about it, what an incident is just something bad happening in your network that could impact your business. And as we get into this, we'll start realizing that this is just another business risk. Most business owners understand that there's risks all over the place when you're running a business. And this is just another risk that you have to consider is information security and cybersecurity threats. And so with this, we'll look at that. This is just about managing risk. And we'll get into some more details on that as we go along.
Great. And so really this next slide kind of jumps right into like, what are we seeing on the cyber liability or cyber liability policies themselves? And there's two main areas where we see like the biggest claims activity. One's going to be cyber extortion, or some people call it usually involving some sort of ransomware. And then funds transfer, but specifically social engineering. So quickly, I'll touch upon, kind of what those two exactly mean. The extortion is, again, maybe somewhat self-explanatory. So someone gets into your guys' computer system and they are basically locking up your data or systems, which basically prevents you from either selling something or performing some kind of duties within your business. And so you'll see right there, I mean, that's pretty devastating. So the average cost, and this came out Q1 of this year, from the FBI. So this is pretty relevant information. Another comment I'll quickly make is these continue to change and get higher and higher as both the demands for the number of Bitcoin being asked and also just the price of Bitcoin is traditionally has been rising as well. Social engineering, that's a very specific funds transfer kind of claim, if you will. Not every cyber policy has it out there, to be frank. Or if they do have it, it's a very small sublimit too. So I'll get into that later on, but what we're finding here is there's just not every policy is created equal. And that's going to be kind of one of my main messages today is you might think you have a cyber policy, but maybe you don't have enough limits, or maybe you don't have the right kind of sublimits themselves. So, and again, if I go back 5 years ago, you look at social engineering, they were starting off at smaller funds, usually from $10,000 to $20,000, and you'll see on the higher range now, it's all the way up to 100,000 and above. And I've had clients in the past who have been hit with this several times. So that's the other aspect of this as well, is like, if someone has been affected by some kind of cyber crime, that it's more likely for it to happen again, a second, a third time, because maybe things haven't been patched or updated like they should have been, like they find the issue but they really haven't resolved kind of how to solve it, So you guys have any comments as far as like, have you had any clients maybe experience some kind of cybercrime and then they didn't implement kind of what you guys recommended, perhaps?
Yeah. I'll speak to these two because like they're the most frequent ones that we've seen. Ransomware, really it was pretty rare specifically that we were seeing it, but we have recently seen an uptick in it, even with clients that are doing many of the right things. I think one thing that's important to mention there, when you talk about that payment, traditionally, like we read the headlines and it's, we're encrypting your data and we're not going to give it back to you unless you pay us. Well, people are backing things up. Hopefully they're doing that. Hopefully they have offsite backups and they've got a good policy set up for that. And so they're like, hey, we're not going to pay you because we've got this data. Well, now they're saying, well, we're going to embarrass you. We're going to take all of your data and at the very least, they're going to embarrass you and dump your data out on the internet. And so all your customer information and whatever other dirty laundry there might be. And so that's the other way that they're trying to collect on that. The funds transfer fraud, we see that all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. Like it's for us, that's the one that we're seeing happen a lot more. One thing I can say about that, there's two things, or I guess there are two big things I can say about that. It's all about your employees. It's all about educating them, having good cyber hygiene, and then good operational policies around funds transfers, especially when you're doing that stuff online. People are trying to get in the middle of a financial transaction. That's what we're always seeing. And it might not even be someone in your organization. It might be someone that they're doing business with.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and I also think that we often hear from businesses that the idea that they don't have anything that a hacker would want, and it seems like that's a very common thing. And it's funny because you're running a business and you do have stuff, but it's also important to know that like a hacker is what they're motivated by is money, and you have money. And so it might not be that the things that you process are super valuable to them, but certainly putting you in a situation where you might want to pay to get out of it is motivating.
Yeah. And then quickly on the social engineering part of that. So for those of you who don't know, it's basically someone impersonating, say, someone in an organization, usually the president or CEO, someone who is requesting some large funds transfers, if you will. And so somebody has been impersonating them, tracking their email, their styles and everything, and then sending a request to say, it could be an internal controller or the CFO requesting funds to be shifted to another bank account, or sometimes someone impersonating like a vendor of yours as well falls under that. So technically it's an approved transaction, like the president has approved it, but it's actually fraudulent. That's why it's called social engineering. So there's a big difference with some of the other typical wire transfers, crime coverage that you have in your policy. So if this would be a great conversation without trying to do a little bit of scaring, I guess. I mean, these are some quick stats, if you will. I won't go through every one of them, but probably the one I'll point out the most is the last one right there. So if you are a small business, and small business in America is kind of defined, it's all over the board. So the SME, small and medium-sized enterprise, in the US, I think typically it's if you're under 50 employees, you're considered small business, and up to 250. It's middle market business, and revenues are kind of all over the place. But that just highlights that if you are a small business and you do not have the proper cyber liability coverage, what we're seeing is the majority of them are going out of business within 6 months. And you'll see right above that, nearly half of the businesses out there do not have cyber coverage at all. And then the next question I usually get is like, well, how much is it? Well, and we'll get into that. So we'll kind of give you high level kind of benchmarking what is appropriate, but it's not going anywhere. And that's the message. It's you got to have the right appropriate plans in place to mitigate this upfront. So these next two slides, I won't read these verbatim, but again, this is just to highlight there's a whole industry around these coverages. And I mentioned before, not every policy is created equal, like the devil is in the detail. Typically speaking, what you have are first party coverages, which are on this page. The next slide will go into third party coverages and also some of the business income things that affect your business from being down. But you'll see right here, basically, you are highlighting, some very expensive people to come in and try to fix things for your guys' loss. And it's not inexpensive by any means. So what it boils down to is like, how many individual affected records did you have, or did it lock up your system to the point where how much business are you losing because you're just now down? So those are very important things to point out right there. And I also like to point this out as well. A good cyber policy does include both electronic data and paper data. So just data in general is something to be very aware of.
I also think that along those lines, there's one thing that kind of makes cyber insurance valuable is when you are under a breach, when you have been breached, and now you have to kind of respond. As you're pointing out there, things can get expensive, and And what people look for the most, I mean, we see it in the news all the time, all these breaches. I mean, people are almost like it's commonplace to have been breached. And what people look for the most is how did you respond? What did you do? And so if you don't have the financial backing to do things that they're looking for, to take care of the issue and right the wrong, so to speak, then you lose a lot of credibility out there. So that's what insurance can help you make, those good decisions that put you in a better light post incident.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Jordan. And I'll back up real quick here. So I kind of skipped over, but first party coverage, so think of this like damages that are actually, or claims or money that's actually being affected to you directly. Obviously it's first party. So this is without anything happening on the back end with, say, any class action lawsuits or individuals suing you. This is just damages to you as the business owner. And then as you get to the second piece, so then you have the third party coverages here. And so again, I've mentioned a couple of times now, not every policy is created equal. I looked at a policy this week as an example. They started with a nominal amount, $250,000 in aggregate limits for cyber. But if you broke down the policy themselves, in that specific example, they had only $10,000 for extortion or cyber extortion, which, as you saw a couple slides earlier, that's one of the most frequent claims examples out there. So you got to kind of do a deeper dive, or at least ask the right questions to your broker to make sure that you understand, are you covered for the most important pieces? Along the same lines for social engineering, again, that's a very specific either coverage or endorsement that you need to add to the cyber policy. The good news is there are a lot of players in the space right now. There's probably at this point, over 100. But what is now challenging is it's harder and harder to get the right amounts, because there's been an amazing amount of claims activity over the last couple of years, which is driving the cost and then the requirements from a security standpoint. So those are the big ones. Joe mentioned, the demands that are paid to like these criminals, like via ransomware. Well, he kind of hit on the head there. The data restoration piece just for your own systems could be also very, very expensive. So that comes out of the computer attack side of things. And then of course, public relations, Jordan was sort of talking about that, like what's that cost or what's at stake there if something bad happens, you might be able to mitigate and get through, but then kind of what's the backlash or after effects of your business? You might tend to be down with a ransomware event for a couple of days, but what's the lingering effects from bad PR, So that's a very important thing to consider. So simply put, who needs cyber insurance? It's really everyone. I will get into some of the more affected industries, but really if you have a computer, if you use technology, which everyone today does, then you have an exposure. It does vary by industry, so that's a very important piece. So that's the good news. But I would say if you're not thinking about it, you really need to have a conversation again with your professionals. And that's, again, as an example, why we thought it'd be important for more of a holistic approach to kind of come together and go through this together, if that makes sense. So really now what we're looking at, I mentioned some of the top 3 affected industries out there across the board, financial institutions. So for example, we would fall under that as an insurance agency. We have tons of protected data that we definitely do not want to get loose or into the wrong hands. Healthcare, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of protected data there. And then anyone with a technology focus, and when I say technology, so if there's a difference between using and making technology. So like we don't make technology, but we use it. Most businesses use it. But if you are in like the IT space, as an example, or a manufacturer who has heavy automation, imagine if you were in that situation, again, your systems are held ransom and now you cannot no longer work and produce kind of revenue. That's really devastating. So those are the top 3 affected. Those are the ones where last year, if you were in those spaces, it was extremely difficult to find the right limits and the right coverage, because what they had going on were these, you guys probably heard this terminology, these attestation forms, saying you had to have specific security measures in place. And that's where, bring it full circle, that's how we started working with someone like Top Dog, because they were getting questions left and right about, hey, do we have this? Can I answer this correctly on my application? Do I have the security measures in place to protect what we need, just to even get a renewal policy? And there's kind of good news and bad news. Maybe the not so good news is, sorry, the good news is we're seeing more collaboration, I guess, with the managed service providers and trying to help their customers along. Kind of the bad news is this has been going on for so long. I mean, I mentioned the market kind of being distressed. We probably don't know the after effects of it yet today, meaning like last year they were saying, hey, we needed to have multi-factor authentication as a minimum. That's going to change probably within the next year, 6 months to a year, as far as new requirements. So just be on top of that. The good news is the insurance companies are paying attention to what they think is appropriate. But if you talk to certain IT professionals, they might say, well, that's really low level security. They should be doing stuff beyond that too. So that actually kind of gets into the next slide right here as we get into it. Like, so as we look at the overall, planning process, like what is a good risk management program? And it has to be, prevention, detection, and then also like a risk transfer piece, or we call mitigation. And, we certainly have the backgrounds and tools to do it. We have, as an example, there's a really cool calculator which we can type in a few numbers and give you like an idea of what like it would cost for, say, if you had a number of affected files fall into the wrong hands, what would be the after effects for each kind of different line of coverage, if you will. But it's super important to have the conversations down before it's too late, as both Joe and Jordan kind of mentioned. So, and probably the biggest thing on this slide right here is what I talk about. The last point there, the application does become a warranty to the policy. So that's a big one. If you answer the questions incorrectly or inadvertently or whatever it might be, say you have a claim and then they review the application, it was marked incorrectly, that could void coverage. So just being very, very upfront about that. And that's where, and I had this conversation again with Joe and Jordan, that I think the way they're handling it is appropriate. I don't believe they're actually filling out the applications, but they are helping answer the questions. And if there are deficiencies, they're helping to address how they can implement those. Is that an accurate statement, guys?
Yeah. I'll just say that we have this year, especially end of last year and into this year, we have had more requests from our customer base to assist them with the renewals, because those questions, like as you pointed out, like MFA, when this product came out a couple of years ago, anybody could get it, it seemed. And it's like, I'm sure the headlines that everyone's seen about these massive ransomware payments. Well, the insurance industries, like you said, it's kind of all over the place. So I think maybe it's a positive thing that they're tightening the leash a little bit to require that a certain baseline security is in place and policies are in place before they'll insure. It's kind of like, getting insurance for your car. You're not going to insure a 16-year-old who doesn't have a driver's license, right? You got to have that kind of baseline tech in this case set up. So just a couple examples. Things that we're seeing now, like you mentioned, MFA. Other things, which is multi-factor authentication, for those of you who haven't heard of that yet, something and something you have, or something you are. So the combination of two of those three things when you authenticate to something. Another thing we're seeing a lot of is specifically asking about endpoint detection response software, which is like new antivirus applications. So we're seeing specific technology, which I'm surprised at. Some of the renewal questions are all over the place, though. There's not a lot of continuity between all of them, but those are a couple things I've seen in nearly every single one. Some are asking about specific applications. And I don't know if you can speak to this at all, Derek, if you've actually gone through through that process of them filling these out, but it does seem like the pointedness of the questions changes based on industry a little bit. You mentioned those the three: financial, healthcare, and technology. I mean, of course, we have to go through renewals. When we did ours, there were a lot more pointed questions on that. Have you seen, does that change the format of the questioning?
We've seen a change in maybe some of those attestation forms.
Mhm.
So I won't say the specific carrier, but they were pretty rapid with it last year. And then they started coming out with some kind of new tweaks and some verbiage that they wanted to see, I guess, or maybe some new products, as you mentioned, like the endpoint detection. I haven't seen it be a requirement yet, but I think it is industry dependent, you know, kind of what are you doing? Are you in a highly sensitive kind of field where that might affect you? Or are you in a higher position to have a cybercrime kind of happen, you know? But that's, you know, it's hard to predict the future, if you will. I mean, I just know it's coming, talking to some of our cyber underwriters, if you will. The other part of that too, as I kind of mentioned, you guys see those applications. I think most cyber insurance companies have gotten pretty good at like what they want to see. And maybe there's still a little bit of a lag effect, but what I am seeing now is before they even issue policy, which is kind of unique, they're actually running scans on the client's systems across the board, and they're kind of seeing if there's any open ports or anything that's kind of a vulnerability. And if they find anything that is a vulnerability, they're saying, hey, we can't issue this policy until this is addressed, you know. And so that was kind of unique, which I'm kind of glad to see in a way. There is technology to do that. Why not implement that on the insurance side? Because historically speaking, insurance has always been somewhat lagging behind with what's actually happening in the world. Like, and I get it. That's just kind of how insurance has been developed. There has to be something happening to where a product is developed to solve that, you know. So it's not a predictive tool. It's more like a kind of lagging way to look at it. So
I think it's because, you know, if we're looking at this from a comprehensive risk management perspective, then what we know now is that it's about risk management. It's not risk elimination, because you'll never eliminate all of your risk. And so you have to go through and, you know, like you mentioned, have a risk assessment so you understand first what risks even exist. And then the business gets to determine what risk decision they're going to make on those risks, you know, so whether they mitigate it, avoid it, or transfer it. So then cyber insurance becomes part of that risk management, because it's basically whatever residual risk you have left over from the decisions that you made for your business. That's what cyber insurance is meant to kind of help cover. So you've accepted some risk, there's some risk left over. Cyber insurance will help through the process of the residual risk, or the risks that, you know, didn't, the controls that were in place to manage risk that didn't work effectively, potentially. And so it's not a surprise that the insurance companies would be asking this, because now over the past couple of years, they've understood what the risk is. So now they're doing what it takes to understand where the risk actually is that they're actually taking on. And it's something that every business should do for themselves, even prior to going to it, to having insurance.
Say, Jordan, I know we're getting close to the end. Do you
Okay.
have any questions that you've collected that you want to pop up there?
No open question.
Okay.
I have one quick comment, I guess, and it goes back to what Jordan was saying right there. So, you know, the world is changing so much. You know, you look at this slide right here as an example, like, okay, these are the steps that you should take, and we strongly do believe that. But I wouldn't be too alarmed. So either if you don't have, say, like an actual prepared playbook, which we would recommend, but if you don't have one, again, a good cyber policy typically does have like an incident response plan. So they have professionals who can help you navigate if something does happen. But again, I'm a big believer that before we even get to an actual incident, like actually having something prepared. And so I know, you know, Joe's team, or even some of the resources we have, we can help develop some of those with our carrier partners. So that's planning is the most important piece of this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I'm going to leave people with anything, the piece of advice that is given here that's probably most golden is during that application process, that it becomes a warranty to the policy. So I have had so many times customers say, hey, I filled in our renewal application, and I just answered yes to everything. Yeah, it's great. You got your policy, but when you need to use it, you're probably not going to be able to. I highly
Correct.
recommend engage with your IT professional when you're doing this and have them help you figure out how those answers are best answered for your organization.
Here's a question. How soon would you recommend engaging with your insurance company after a confirmed incident?
As soon as possible. Yes. Well, I mean, I'm kind of being, half a joking about, but it's true. I mean, anytime you have really any kind of claim happening, whether it's cyber or other lines, like putting your broker or agent on notice, I think is the most important steps. And because oftentimes you won't really know when or what to actually do, I guess. And there's also like conditions within the policy that state you have to kind of let the carrier know what's potentially going on, even if there's not an actual claim in some cases. Because in those regards, they might be able to give you some additional resources and things to be thinking about to further mitigate potential further kind of loss. So that's a good question. And kind of along the same lines, I was going to mention this quickly too. So like, if you have a policy and you know your renewal's coming up and you're getting paperwork like these attestation forms from your broker, fill those out as soon as possible, truthfully, because if you find that you have some areas that you need to identify and kind of get up to pace, if you will, it might take some time to get those security measures implemented. And so what you don't want to do is get past your renewal and then not have a policy.
Great stuff. And I would also say, some of that, as far as when engaging with your insurance provider after a confirmed incident, regardless of what it is, I mean, I think, yeah, as soon as possible. But I also think, that's also a decision up to you that you can put in your playbook. And I think that just kind of gives you a, think about when you think it's most relevant to you to engage them, and make sure it's in your playbook, so that, because we all know that once an incident, when you're in the middle of an incident, if you don't have stuff kind of predetermined as a part of an incident response plan, you don't do a lot of great thinking when you're stressed and running around. So having it documented ahead of time is good.
That's a good point.
Any other comments on that? But there's a couple more questions coming through. Here's an interesting one. They say we applied for cyber insurance 2 years ago through our insurance company, and they were rejected, primarily due to the following: bank accounts and wire transfers are not reconciled by someone not authorized to deposit or withdrawal, and we do not require counter signatures of checks. And so that was something that was asked on the questionnaire.
Okay.
They don't do it. They're a company of 7, and they got rejected. Any suggestion?
I'm taking a guess at this. I mean, I always say it's important to know what the business is and what they're doing first, to kind of understand what's going on. But it could be something as simple as, before you even get to the insurance piece of it, like, those are specific risk controls you can potentially take internally to prevent something from happening in the first place. So I think that's oftentimes if you're getting denial because you're not answering something to the liking of the underwriter, if you will, there's probably a reason why. There's probably a good reason why you should maybe be thinking about implementing those, and maybe you guys have your own reasons why it doesn't make sense to do that. I don't know your situation, but usually the underwriters, there's a couple of questions where they have to have favorable responses before they'll proceed. I mean, is a simple way to put it. And by the way, I used to be a former underwriter, so I kind of have a mindset of how they think.
Yeah, I mean, I that raises a question. Well, first of all, my thought on that was 2 years ago. So this, I mean, is it possible that this was kind of their attempt when maybe they didn't quite understand the risk like they do now, and this was one of their attempts of saying, oh, let's put this in here, because you don't see it in every policy application. And
Correct.
And which also maybe is another suggestion, is that if one insurance company won't cover you, maybe try another one, because the application process might be drastically different. But then also there's a comment that segregation of duties is a very important risk control, so.
Well, it's
You
a
know-
good point, Jordan. Yeah, I think 2 years ago, 2 years is a long time, especially in the cyberspace. Things have rapidly changed. I don't know if it's any easier today, and that also might be more specific to like the social engineering things I talked about. Claims earlier in the slides here, but usually you can get other cyber coverages, just maybe not the right either limits or the right specific coverages within the cyber. Because when I say cyber is a pretty big, you guys saw on those 2 slides there, there's a lot of insuring agreements within a cyber policy. So it could be a portion of that you're being denied on too. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Here's another question we got. Is there ever a cyber/E&O claim together? Like cyber happened because something was not done correctly by the IT professional?
So that like third party and first party, like your IT providers doing third party and you're getting first party?
Is that the question, Jordan? I think
That is
Yeah.
okay.
yeah, that is the question.
Yeah, potentially, and it's we're kind of going down a separate rabbit hole, but yeah, that's why I mentioned in the application process, and I said, hey, and I've asked Joe and Jordan this specifically, like, you guys aren't filling those applications directly. You shouldn't be, because if you are, then it is an E&O claim on your behalf if something is done wrong, or even if it's a groundless or fruitless claim, you're still having to pay attorney's fees, defense fees, things like that. So just to litigate. So I always say just avoid that, but you certainly can help, your customers and just walk them through that. But I always, even like for us, because we get asked all the time, hey, can you just fill out the application? You have our prior year's application, and if there's any differences, we want to eliminate any gray area. We prefer the insured do it, and then they have to sign off, basically sign off on the application itself. I'm not sure if I answered the question or not, but that's there are certain risk controls beyond, again, a policy that you can take up from to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like that it is a complicated question to answer, because there is kind of that you got 2 separate companies that have their own insurance, and how do you know what should cover what if there's an incident with that company's network, and if they think that the IT company that they're working with caused the problem, that gets a little messy.
Yeah, and again, I would also look at it again, if you have a good cyber policy, and they determine, well, we are going to cover you because X, Y, and Z happened, but you know what? There's actually maybe another player at stake. The insurance companies potentially could subrogate to the other parties involved too. So that's a very common thing if they feel like there's some other shenanigans going on with another party, and it's like, you see it all the time with other lines of coverage where they're going to make their insured whole. That's the promise of the contract and the policy. But then if they can recuperate and subrogate, they will. So.
Yeah.
All right. Are those
Any other
all?
questions?
I think those are all the questions we have today.
Good.
I think we kept this pretty short and sweet, you guys.
We somehow did it. We
Yeah.
thought we would take 2 days to do this, and we hope we can do it in 30 minutes. I think we did a decent job.
So big takeaways: application process becomes warranty to the policy. So talk to your IT people before you fill that out yourself.
Well, I'd like to, before folks leave the webinar, we are planning on doing another webinar next month that will cover some things. We don't have a date set yet, but you might get an email. People probably got bombarded with emails, but I think there's kind of a part 2 to this, and one of those is because we've seen this happening, and so Top Dog, we've put together bundles and packages that you could maybe even call them cyber insurance application preparedness package, because it covers these things that we frequently see, And so if you want to know more about those, you can reach out to us and we'll probably present on that next month. But even just maybe we'll even go into some of the application process and go through what's being asked. And, I think we could take a little deeper dive even in the next webinar.
Yeah, it's good. Of
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks, Derek.
course,
Thanks,
anytime.
thanks attendees.
Yeah.
All right. That's
All
a
right,
wrap. Thank you
that's a
for
wrap.
attending. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
good one. Bye-bye.
See ya.